Our next speaker will be Mark Green. He is a physician and a retired U.S. Army major who has been the U.S. representative for Tennessee's 7th Congressional District since 2019. He is a Republican and he chairs the Committee on Homeland Security. Mark, what was it like to be a member of the Republican caucus during those marathon sessions to elect the next Speaker of the House?
I think our emotions went up and down, and some of it was satisfaction, I guess would be one way to put it. For me, anyway, I can only speak for myself. We as a party are not this robotic thing that falls in line with the speaker. If you look at the way Nancy Pelosi ran her conference, it was 100% robotic. What she said happened, and that's not how the people of America expected Congress to work. Certainly, people who are Republicans don't expect the Republican Party to function that way. On our side, we had negotiations, and those negotiations were evolving. A majority of the Freedom Caucus was actually with Speaker McCarthy from the beginning based on the changes that were announced the Sunday before the votes started. So the majority were happy on Sunday. The other 20 went into several votes, and then the emotions were just, are we there yet? No. Okay, one more. We'll go another one. Are we there yet? No. But we finally did. We negotiated out. We got it, and McCarthy walked up and banged the gavel. So I think it reflects a real commitment to democracy, and the rules package, we can talk about that if you want to. I think it's very beneficial to America.
Give me some examples of the House rule changes.
One of the most frustrating things to me as a member of Congress now in my third term is this idea that you can just tack anything onto a bill. So it doesn't have to be in the concept of that bill. 8,000-page bills that wind up adding billions of dollars to that budget. That's very frustrating because you'll start with something that you definitely want to vote for and you want to support, and they tack on all this other stuff, and I can't support the whole bill. They've done away with that. A bill has to be one single subject, and all the amendments to that bill have to be in line with that subject. That's going to save the country billions of dollars. The second thing is they'd hand that 6,000-page bill to you and tell you we're voting on it. So they'd hand it to you at 11 o'clock at night and vote 3 calendar days. So it's physically impossible to read the entire bill before they expect you to vote on it. It's actually offensive because it basically says, okay, leadership gets to write bills and we just have to vote on them, keeping in line with the way the Democrats have done business. Now it's a full 72 hours. So if you drop the bill at 11 p.m., we can't vote until 3 days later, 11 p.m. And since the bills are going to be shorter because we're not tacking all this other stuff on, we'll be able to get through them. So I think that's 2 examples of 2 rules that are A, going to make Congress work more efficiently, and B, protect the pocketbooks of taxpayers.
Does it matter that the Freedom Caucus received 3 seats on the House Rules Committee?
The Rules Committee can create exceptions to rules, so they can actually vote to override rules. Now the Freedom Caucus has 3 votes in that committee and can help control whether or not ridiculous exceptions happen to violate the rules. That was a really important piece of this. If you're going to have rules that the Freedom Caucus and other conservative members of the Congress have asked for, you got to have a mechanism to keep them from being undone. Putting 3 members on the Rules Committee, that's the safety net, if you will.
Do the 15 floor votes that elected Speaker McCarthy ironically increase his power because he now has a stronger hand in his negotiations with President Biden and the Senate Majority Leader Schumer because he can assert that he cannot control his conservative flank?
I think it does, absolutely, especially when we're contending against the Senate on budget issues. This really empowers McCarthy. It empowers the House. Because remember, McCarthy can be removed now with one person on our side making a recommendation. So it really empowers the Republican caucus to contend against some crazy thing coming out of the Senate.
What was it like to be in the middle of the Speaker election negotiations?
Well, I mean, it was tense. Kevin's perspective, particularly as it relates to giving people positions on committees, he thought that was a little bit unfair. The problem was there was also some need to make that steering committee a little more representative of the conference as a whole. So that was another one of the things that got negotiated, and that's Freedom Caucus membership on the steering committee. It was tense at times because that philosophical difference. You look at a Republican sitting in a 70-30 Republican district, that Republican is different than a Republican who sits in a Biden 13. And we have a Republican who actually sits in a Biden 13. So I'd rather have that guy in there who will vote 60% of the time with us than a Democrat who will vote 10% of the time with us.
Why didn't any of the Democrats vote for McCarthy to be the speaker to minimize the power of the Freedom Caucus?
I think they loved watching us struggle through the process. And we wouldn't have allowed it because they'd have made demands. And their demands would have been significantly different than the conservative caucus's demands. So Kevin said he never entertained a negotiation with the left to get his speakership, and I commend him for that. It cost him an agonizing week, but it was the best thing for the country in the end.
You mentioned that the Democrats enjoyed watching the internal strife amongst the Republicans. Why did the Republicans engage this debate offline, maybe in a convention hall away from the Democrats?
I think making it go to the floor actually forced the process for both sides to come to an agreement, and actually would have lasted a lot longer had we not been voting.
How will the long and combative speaker election affect the workings of the Republican caucus?
I had an old mentor of mine say that the road to maturity must cross the bridge of disillusionment, meaning you have to go through some conflict to get to a point where a relationship is matured and meaningful and deep. You can either go two ways with conflict. You either become greater enemies or you become closer friends if you work it out. I would submit to you that we've gotten closer, and I'll give you an example. Literally the next week, one of the bills we wanted to pass was this protection of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Well, guess who came to the rescue and saved that effort with an amendment? Matt Gaetz, one of the biggest holdouts against McCarthy, came to the rescue and saved our first piece of legislation. So we went through this process. We fought like cats and dogs and came to an agreement. And then that body started working super well together. And if you look at the legislation that's happened since then, whether it's kicking Ilhan Omar, the anti-Semite, off of the Foreign Affairs Committee, or the protection of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or voting against socialism and getting 100 Democrats to support that, those are wins for our side. And I think it's all a product of going through and birthing through those challenges.
How did the negotiation with the Freedom Caucus change the House committee selections? And specifically, did it have any influence in your getting to be chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security?
I would submit to you that it probably did not change the committee chairmanships. By changing the steering committee slightly, you got a little more conservative memberships in the committees. There's been some assertions that I got this chairmanship because of a deal that was cut. One, McCarthy says that's not true, and so does the Freedom Caucus folks who were in the room. But I have a breadth and depth of leadership that my competition just simply didn't have. I had been working that steering committee for a year, going and meeting with them individually, doing desktop PowerPoints, expressing my experience as a physician, as a business leader with a master's in information systems. But I know from articles that have come out recently, that's not necessarily the perspective of everyone.
Mark, you were a member of the Republican minority in the House in your first two terms, and you complained to me when you sat in the minority that you had little to do because the House did not engage with the minority party. Is the Republican plan to engage with the Democratic minority with the hope that when the shoe is on the other foot, that the Democrats will treat Republicans in a similar manner?
I think the answer to that is yes, and I can tell you, at least on my behalf as a committee chairman, I've made a commitment to the ranking member that we're going to advance some bipartisan stuff. So I think America wants to see the needle move. They want to see Congress function. I started the Reagan O'Neill Club, where we bring Democrats and Republicans together after hours to have an adult beverage and just get to know one another. You know, the parties have diverged so much in the country. The trick isn't necessarily to agree. Well, we're not going to agree, but we don't have to hate one another for disagreeing. Mending relationships, that's one thing. And then finding those areas where the Venn diagram still overlaps and executing effective legislation and oversight in those areas is critical. I think the American people expect it. We have to deliver on that stuff.
One House rule change is the elimination of the Gephardt rule, thus forcing a vote on an increase in the debt ceiling. Speaker McCarthy is already using that debt ceiling as leverage in his negotiation to limit future government spending. President Biden has said publicly that he will not play that game, but Speaker McCarthy is having ongoing conversations with Biden on this very topic. How important was the elimination of the Gephardt rule?
It's a good thing. We've got to be able to negotiate on discretionary spending. When Republicans had the majority the last time, we actually decreased discretionary spending by $10 billion. Now, $10 billion is not a lot, but normally it goes up. And in the last Congress, it went up trillions. We cannot continue to spend like we're currently doing. We're going to bankrupt the country. What Biden's saying is essentially we just have to accept this without a discussion. Well, that's like a husband or wife running up the credit cards and then refusing to talk to the other spouse. There's no spouse in America that would put up with that. So we're not going to put up with it. We're going to sit down and negotiate, and that means we got to do something.
What are you optimistic about?
I am optimistic that this budget stuff will result in some savings for our country. I'm optimistic that the Republican-controlled House will be able to insert some transparency into our foreign policy. The issues that sort of fall in my realm, like cybersecurity, southern border security, we're going to make some inroads there. Will it be exactly what we want? No, we won't get that until we have the Senate and the White House. I have a positive outlook. There's still work to be done. We'll move the needle a little bit this Congress. And then when we get control in 24 for the Senate and the White House, we won't fail.
I suspect that with a divided Congress, a Republican House, and a Democratic Senate, that no major legislation is going to pass this session. So why was there such a big fight in the Republican caucus when so little was at stake?
We're the roadblock to crazy spending and crazy liberal ideas, and we had to get it right. And the rules were the starting point for getting that right. I think the discussions we had that brought the middle of the party and the right of the party together was very valuable.
The Republican House can use its power to investigate the Biden administration. What do you think will be the focus of these investigations?
Well, I'll be oversighting Alejandro Mayorkas, who just left my office. I think we'll get some transparency. We'll shine a camera and a light where the last Congress refused to oversight the administration. That's going to be good for the American people. When they realize what's happening at the southern border, because we're going to make them aware of it, I think America will put pressure on that side of the political aisle and some change can happen. That's the hope anyway. And I recognize hope is not a method, but we will be aggressive and forceful in that oversight.
What did you think of Biden's State of the Union address? And did you appreciate having Speaker McCarthy on the dais behind the president and next to the vice president?
Well, it was great to see Kevin up there and very satisfying. Look, there were things the president said that I agreed with. But I got to tell you, it's really hard to go sit down with President Biden after he says you're going to steal food from the mouths of babes and senior citizens. That was a lie. It was a bold-faced lie. There's no Republican who wants to cut Medicare or Social Security benefits. It's a political talking point for them. They basically are lying in order to gain power. That was very offensive to nearly all of us. It makes working with Biden very hard. I'm not so sure a lot of bipartisanship is going to happen with a guy like that, with a guy who shines red lights and looks like he's in the Death Star with Marines behind him talking about how we, people like me, are a threat to democracy. It's absurd. I was prepared to give my life for this country, and on a couple of occasions almost had to when bullets were ripping through the helicopter I was in. So I was offended by that part of it. But he's also the president of the United States. And having served in the military, I respect the rank instead of the officer. I will always be respectful of the president of the United States. And where we can work together, I will, as best as I possibly can.